Master craftsmen once forged swords that could slice through armor and built concrete that repaired its own cracks. This was the real Middle Ages, a time of brilliant inventions that simply vanished from history. By the end of this journey, you will understand how 30 of these lost marvels actually worked and why their disappearance still matters today. We will uncover the secret behind a fire that burned on water and reveal how Viking sailors navigated using nothing but a crystal. This story will permanently change what you think of the so-called Dark Ages. What forgotten invention from the past do you wish we had never lost? But this vibrant world of invention existed on a knife's edge. Think of the Middle Ages not as a single dark room, but as a vast network of workshops, each holding a flickering candle of knowledge. These candles were lit in the bustling markets of Baghdad, the quiet monasteries of Ireland, and the growing university towns of France and Italy. They were connected by the Great Silk Road, a sprawling web of trade routes where merchants did more than just sell silk and spices. They carried ideas. A design for a better water pump could travel from China to Persia. A new method for grinding lenses might pass from an Arab scholar to a Venetian glassblower. This was a global conversation centuries before we called it globalization. At the heart of this system were the guilds. These were more than just medieval unions. They were living libraries of technique, where a master craftsman would pass down his secrets to a chosen apprentice over years of painstaking work. This protected the quality of goods, from intricate clockwork to the tempering of a sword's blade. But it also made the knowledge incredibly fragile. If a master died before passing on his most guarded secret, if a war scattered a guild, or if a plague emptied a city, that particular candle was snuffed out forever. The light of that invention simply vanished. This is the paradox of the medieval world, a time of both brilliant connection and devastating fragility. It is within this delicate balance that we find our first true lost technology, a marvel of engineering that defied its own time. A stream of liquid flame erupts from a Byzantine war galley, clinging to the wooden hulls of enemy ships and even dancing across the water itself. This was Greek fire, and its horror was matched only by its mystery. Historical accounts from scholars like Anna Comnene describe it as a weapon that could not be doused with water, some reports even suggesting that water only magnified its fury. Its exact recipe was the most closely guarded secret of the Byzantine Empire, a state secret on par with the crown jewels. While we know it likely involved a form of crude petroleum, perhaps mixed with quicklime that ignited upon contact with water and other resins or chemicals, the true formula was known to so few that when those keepers of the secret perished, the knowledge vanished with them. Think of the immense power this single weapon held. It was not merely a tool of destruction. It was a psychological force that could scatter entire fleets before a single ship was even boarded. Its deployment from bronze tubes mounted on the prows of ships or the walls of Constantinople created an unstoppable, terrifying spectacle. Modern chemists and historians have tried for centuries to recreate it, but every attempt is just an approximation, a shadow of the real thing. How could such a potent advantage, a cornerstone of naval supremacy for centuries, simply fade away? The answer is a stark lesson in the fragility of secret knowledge. When a technology is held by a tiny, protected elite, it becomes a single, flickering candle in a vast, dark room. One strong gust of wind, one sudden disaster, and the light is gone forever. This loss of a chemical weapon, however, leads us directly to the disappearance of something far more beautiful and just as complex: the art of creating a unique, vibrant pigment that colored the medieval world. While Greek fire was a weapon of dramatic destruction, another lost technology was designed for quiet, enduring creation. Deep within the stones of some medieval structures lies a secret of incredible resilience, a concrete that could literally heal itself. We are not talking about Roman concrete, famous for its longevity, but about evidence that medieval builders in certain regions developed their own advanced formulas with similar miraculous properties. Imagine a tiny crack forming in a cathedral wall after a harsh winter. With modern concrete, that crack would widen, letting in more water and accelerating decay. But with this special medieval mix, that same crack could begin to seal itself shut. This was not magic, but masterful chemistry at work. The secret lay in intentionally mixing reactive ingredients into the formula. Builders might have included small chunks of quicklime or specific types of volcanic ash. When rainwater seeped into a new crack, it would react with these hidden particles. This slow chemical dance produced new crystalline structures that gradually filled the gap, effectively healing the wound from the inside out. This process, known as a pozzolanic reaction, meant that unlike modern concrete which can crumble over decades, this medieval variant could potentially grow stronger over centuries. The creation of this living stone was a delicate art. It began with the precise heating or calcination of limestone to create quicklime. This was then carefully slaked with water, a dangerous process that released immense heat before being mixed with unique local aggregates like certain crushed bricks or ashes that provided the essential reactive properties. The final recipe was a guarded secret of master masons, passed down through generations by word of mouth and hands-on practice. But as architectural styles shifted from thick, sturdy walls to more ornate and delicate structures, the need for such robust concrete faded. The meticulous recipes, never written down in any systematic way, were gradually forgotten. Today, materials scientists are in a race to reverse engineer these ancient marvels, hoping to create modern, self-healing concretes that could revolutionize our infrastructure. It is a humbling thought that the key to building more durable cities for our future might be hidden in the silent, standing stones of our past. This quest to build things that last leads our gaze upward to a time when inventors dreamed of conquering the skies themselves. While concrete could heal the earth's cracks, one monk dared to believe he could conquer the sky itself. Around the year 1010, a Benedictine monk named Eilmer of Malmesbury fastened wings to his hands and feet and climbed the tall tower of his abbey. He did not jump as a man falling, but as a man intending to fly. The historian William of Malmesbury recorded that Eilmer glided for over a furlong, the length of about 200 meters, before a terrifying crash broke both his legs. This was not a leap of faith, but a leap of engineering. Eilmer's wings were likely a wooden frame carefully covered with fabric or perhaps even feathers, a design meant to catch the air like a very early hang glider. He understood he needed speed and lift, launching himself into the wind from the high point. He even recognized his design's flaw after the flight, reportedly suggesting that a tail would have given him the stability he needed to land safely. His thinking was fundamentally aerodynamic, a brilliant spark of understanding that flickered and then vanished. The knowledge he gained from that painful, courageous flight was not written down in any manual. It was not passed to an apprentice or improved by a guild. It remained a local tale, a miracle or a folly, but not a foundation for future discovery. The dream of human flight was largely set aside for centuries, a testament to how a single moment of genius, when isolated, can be lost to the ages. This solitary flight into the air stands in stark contrast to technologies that sought to draw immense power not from the sky, but from the steady, relentless flow of water. The steady rhythm of the sea offered a power source far more predictable than any river. Along the coastlines of early medieval Ireland and England, communities did not just live by the sea, they partnered with it, building ingenious mills powered not by flowing freshwater, but by the immense daily pulse of the tides. These tidal mills were masterpieces of synchronization with nature. The core design was both simple and brilliant. Builders would first construct a large dam or a pond along a tidal estuary. As the high tide rolled in, massive sluice gates would open, allowing the seawater to flood this reservoir. Then, at the peak of the tide, the gates were closed, trapping a huge volume of water. For hours, the mill would sit in quiet anticipation, waiting for the sea to retreat. When the tide was at its lowest ebb, the gates were opened again. But this time, the captured water, desperate to return to the sea, would rush out through a narrow channel, spinning a powerful water wheel that drove the millstones to grind grain. This was not a technology of brute force, but of perfect timing. It required an intimate, generational knowledge of the lunar cycles, of local geography, and of the strength required to build seawalls that could withstand constant, brutal punishment from the waves. The Domesday Book, that great survey of 11th century England, carefully notes the existence of these mills, listing them as valuable assets. They were not obscure experiments, but vital parts of the local economy. So why did they vanish? The answer lies in the march of convenience. While tidal mills were powerful, they were also bound to their specific coastal locations and operated on a strict, unchangeable schedule dictated by the moon. The rise of more versatile river mills and later windmills offered freedom. A windmill could be built almost anywhere with a steady breeze, and a river mill could operate whenever the river flowed, not just at specific hours. The specialized, location-locked knowledge of the tidal mill engineers was no longer in high demand. Slowly, over generations, the precise techniques for building the most effective sluice gates and the most resilient seawalls faded from memory. We lost a profound example of true renewable energy, a technology that humbly worked within the celestial rhythms of our planet. This ambition to harness cosmic forces finds a parallel in an even more audacious invention, one that tried to build a miniature universe inside a metal shell. The ambition to build a miniature universe was not lost with Eilmer's flight. Centuries before the great clockwork cathedrals of the Renaissance, medieval scholars were already attempting to capture the motions of the heavens in intricate, hand-held machines. We know of the Antikythera, a mechanism from the ancient world, but scattered clues hint that the knowledge of complex geared devices did not vanish overnight. It likely persisted in a quieter, humbler form. These were not grand bronze computers recovered from shipwrecks, but smaller, more personal tools known as Equatoria. Crafted from wood or brass, these devices were manual calculators designed to predict the dance of planets and the precise timing of eclipses. They translated abstruse astronomical tables into a physical form you could hold in your hands, turning a scroll full of difficult mathematics into a simple turn of a geared dial. A monk or a scholar could line up a series of carefully cut gears and, by following a specific procedure, see where Mars would be in the sky 3 months from Tuesday. One of the most famous figures associated with this esoteric knowledge was Gerbert of Aurillac, a scholar who would later become Pope Sylvester II. He was rumored to have possessed a marvelous astronomical device, perhaps even a mechanical astrolabe, and his profound mathematical learning was so advanced that many of his contemporaries believed it could only have come from magic. The real magic, however, was in the craftsmanship. Creating an equatorium required a master with a deep understanding of both celestial mechanics and metalworking. Each gear had to be hand-cut with a precision that ensured its teeth would mesh perfectly with the next, translating the irregular cycles of the planets into a smooth, predictable rotation. This was a specialized art passed from master to apprentice in a workshop, a fragile chain of practical knowledge. But as intellectual priorities shifted in the later Middle Ages, the demand for these specific mechanical marvels began to wane. The scholarly focus moved toward pure philosophy and theology, away from the hands-on building of models. The artisans who knew how to cut those perfect gears found fewer and fewer patrons. The knowledge, never widely spread to begin with, simply faded away, severing a direct, tangible link between observing the cosmos and building a machine to replicate its laws. This loss of mechanical astronomy was profound, but the same drive to create wonder through gears and levers found a different, more playful outlet in the courts of powerful kings. The intricate gears of mechanical astronomy found a parallel in a world of pure wonder, where court engineers built machines that seemed to possess a life of their own. The designs of the ancient Greek engineer Hero of Alexandria, who created automated theaters and moving statues powered by steam and water, were never truly lost to the Middle Ages. Instead, they were carefully preserved and spectacularly reimagined by Byzantine and Arab engineers, who saw in these ancient blueprints a key to displaying both divine power and human ingenuity. In the throne rooms of emperors and caliphs, guests might witness a miniature theater where mechanical figures acted out a biblical parable or a mythological tale, all driven by a hidden system of counterweights, falling sand, and cleverly timed levers. Al-Jazari, a brilliant 13th-century engineer, documented this entire tradition in his book of knowledge of ingenious mechanical devices. His pages are filled with designs for automated peacocks that sang, servant figures that refilled royal wine cups, and even complex water clocks where tiny doors would open on the hour to reveal a new mechanical marvel. These were not just toys, they were masterpieces of hydraulic and pneumatic engineering. The power of steam, the relentless pull of gravity on a slowly descending weight, and the precise flow of water through a series of siphons and valves were all harnessed to create the illusion of life. This knowledge represented a golden thread, a direct fusion of ancient Greek mechanical principles with new Islamic innovations. Yet this thread was spun from the finest silk and kept behind the highest walls. The ability to create such automata was a secret art, known only to a handful of court engineers whose purpose was to amaze and intimidate visiting dignitaries, reinforcing the ruler's power and wisdom. Because this knowledge was never shared widely, never taught in guilds or universities, it remained incredibly fragile. When a dynasty fell or a patron's interest shifted, the engineers and their secrets could simply vanish. The same principles of pressure and force that made a tiny bird sing, however, were also understood on a vastly different, more terrifying scale. The same principles of pressure and force that animated a courtly automaton could be scaled into a weapon of war. Deep within the armories of the late Roman Empire, and persisting into the early medieval period, soldiers carried a deceptively simple yet brutally effective weapon, the Plumbata. This was not a standard javelin. It was a carefully engineered lead-weighted dart, a marvel of battlefield physics that most infantrymen would carry several of, tucked behind their shields. Its design was its genius. A shaped lead weight was cast directly onto a slender iron shaft, front-heavy like a badminton birdie, guaranteeing it would always fly point first. This was often topped with a barbed iron head, and the shaft was fletched with wood or feathers for stability. The result was a missile with far greater range and shocking accuracy than a simple spear. A soldier could hurl it in a high, arcing volley, and the weighted head would drive down onto an enemy's shield or helmet with concentrated, armor-piercing force. This allowed a line of infantry to unleash a devastating shower of metal before the two sides ever crashed together in melee combat. Creating the Plumbata was a specialized craft. It required a blacksmith who could skillfully work the slender iron shaft, a metalsmith who knew how to safely cast the molten lead weight directly onto that iron core, and a fletcher's touch to add the stabilizing fletching. This was a product of a sophisticated, organized military system that valued combined arms and disciplined volley fire. So why did this superior weapon vanish? The battlefield itself changed. The slow decline of the massed Roman infantry and the rising dominance of heavy cavalry, the knights in shining armor, fundamentally altered military doctrine. Warfare became more about the decisive charge and individual combat. The tactical need for a soldier to carry and effectively launch a volley of specialized dints faded away. The guilds or military workshops that held the specific knowledge for producing the perfect weight to shift balance for the Plumbata found no new apprentices. The skill tied to a specific way of fighting simply atrophied and disappeared. This demonstrates a crucial pattern that a technology does not become lost simply because it is inferior, but often because the world that required it has vanished. This same fate would befall machines of a much larger, more terrifying scale. The raw power of the trebuchet is iconic, but the true genius behind the largest counterweight machines was a secret art of physics and timber. While we think of these as massive catapults, the medieval master who designed one was not a carpenter, but an engineer who understood levers, momentum, and material stress on a breathtaking scale. His knowledge was not written in a book but held in his mind and hands. He knew, for example, that a counterweight swinging freely in a pivoting box delivered a far more powerful and efficient throw than a simple dead weight bolted into place. This subtle understanding transformed a simple machine into a devastating weapon. Building such a colossus was a logistical nightmare. It required an army of laborers and specialized woodwrights to locate, shape, and join enormous timbers, often while the entire structure was under immense tension. The sling's release mechanism alone was a masterpiece of timing, a hook and ring system that had to let go at the exact moment in the arm's arc to achieve maximum range and accuracy. A fraction of a second too early or too late, and the 200-pound stone would plummet harmlessly short or fly wildly past its target. These masters worked from experience and rule of thumb passed down through apprenticeships. They knew the optimal ratio for the throwing arm's length on either side of the pivot point, and they understood exactly how much a specific type of wood could flex before it would splinter. But when gunpowder cannons began to roar on the battlefield, the demand for these timber titans vanished almost overnight. Why spend weeks constructing a single massive machine when a bronze cannon could be moved and fired the same day? The guilds of trebuchetites disbanded, their apprentices learned new trades, and that deep, intuitive knowledge of leveraged force was scattered to the winds. The age of raw mechanical power gave way to an era that demanded a different kind of genius, one that could guide a ship across the trackless ocean using only the sky above. Far out in the gray expanse of the North Atlantic, where the sea and sky merge into a single featureless dome, a Viking navigator held a clear crystal up to his eye. This was the Sunstone, a tool that felt almost like magic but was grounded in a profound understanding of light itself. Norse sagas tell of sailors who could find the sun on the cloudiest days, a skill that seemed impossible to their contemporaries. Modern experiments now suggest they were using a crystal of calcite or cordierite, minerals that have a unique property called polarization. When sunlight passes through the Earth's atmosphere, it becomes polarized, meaning its light waves vibrate in a specific direction that circles the sun, even when the sun itself is completely hidden by clouds or fog. The sunstone acted as a filter. A skilled navigator would slowly rotate the crystal while looking through it toward the sky. At a certain angle, the crystal would appear to brighten, while at another it would darken. By finding these points of contrast in the uniform gray overhead, he could triangulate the hidden sun's position with startling accuracy. This was not a simple tool you could just pick up and use. It required a lifetime of accumulated wisdom, a deep, intuitive feel for the shifting moods of the sky and sea. A master navigator would teach his apprentice not just how to hold the stone, but how to interpret the subtle shifts in light through haze, through thin clouds, and in the twilight hours after sunset. This knowledge was an oral tradition, a fragile chain of experience passed from one generation to the next without a single written manual. It was this very mastery that allowed the Vikings to routinely sail to Iceland, Greenland, and even the coast of North America, journeys that would have been unthinkable for sailors who clung to the shoreline. So how could such a vital skill simply vanish? The answer arrived with the magnetic compass. This new technology provided a consistent, reliable reference point regardless of the weather or time of day. It was a tool that could be used by any sailor with basic training, breaking the monopoly of the master navigators and their mystical crystals. The profound, experiential art of reading polarized light was no longer necessary. The sunstones themselves were set aside, and the intricate knowledge required to use them faded from memory, becoming little more than a legend in the sagas. This intuitive communion with the natural world represents one extreme of lost knowledge, but our next discovery involves the opposite, a deliberate and fiery transformation of the very elements themselves. The name Ulfberht was more than a signature on a sword. It was a mark of terrifying quality. Forged between the 8th and 11th centuries, these Viking blades possessed a near mythical reputation. In an age where many swords were brittle, prone to shattering in the heat of battle, an Ulfberht was something else entirely. It was flexible, it was incredibly sharp, and it was unbelievably tough. To the warrior facing one, it must have felt like he was fighting with a weapon from the future. The secret was not in the shape of the blade, but in the very essence of its steel. While most European swords at the time were made from a crude, lumpy iron known as bloomery steel, full of impurities called slag that created weak points, the Ulfberhts were crafted from a material called crucible steel. This was a hyper-pure form of steel with a very high, consistent carbon content. Creating it was a monumental challenge. It began with raw iron and carbon sources like charcoal being sealed inside a tight clay pot, a crucible. This sealed vessel was then heated in a furnace for days, reaching temperatures that medieval European forges could scarcely achieve, until the contents inside melted completely into a liquid pool. This intense, controlled heat allowed the carbon to dissolve evenly throughout the iron, and the impurities, being lighter, would rise to the top to be removed. The result was a single, homogeneous ingot of perfect high-carbon steel. This ingot could then be painstakingly forged into a blade that was both hard enough to hold a razor edge and flexible enough to bend without breaking. The source of this miraculous raw material was almost as incredible as the swords themselves. Metallurgical analysis points to the steel coming from Central Asia, traveling thousands of miles along Viking trade routes that stretched down the Volga River to the Caspian Sea. The Ulfberht makers were not just master smiths, they were part of a global network importing a space-age material for their time. But this connection was their greatest vulnerability. When political upheavals in the East and the shifting of trade roads finally severed that supply line, the raw material vanished from the North. The secret knowledge of how to work it, held by only a few smithing families, became useless. No one in Europe knew how to reproduce that quality of steel from local ores for centuries. The existing Ulfberht swords became priceless relics, their method of creation a total mystery until modern scientists, using advanced scanners, could peer into the metal's crystalline structure and finally understand what made them so special. The legacy of the Ulfberht is a stark reminder that the most advanced technology can be utterly dependent on a fragile supply chain. Just as the recipe for perfect steel could be forgotten, so too could the methods for creating the very pages that recorded such secrets. The formula for that perfect ruby red glass was a secret more guarded than any treasure. Inside a master glazier's workshop, creating the color was not a matter of simply adding dye. It was a high-stakes alchemical ritual. The craftsman would begin by adding minuscule amounts of pure gold or copper to a molten batch of clear glass. This was only the first, most basic step. The true magic happened during the annealing, the slow, controlled cooling of the finished piece. The glass had to be heated a second time to a very specific temperature, one known only by the master's experienced eye, judging the color of the furnace's fire. At this precise heat, the dissolved metal atoms would begin to clump together, forming particles so small they were invisible to the human eye. If the glass was cooled too quickly, the particles would not form, and the glass would remain a dirty, unremarkable brown. If the heat was too high or held for too long, the particles would grow too large, turning the glass an opaque, muddy red. But if the cooling was perfect, these nanoparticles would become suspended in the glass, each one acting as a tiny prism that trapped and scattered the light. This is what gave the red its legendary depth and inner fire, a color that seemed to glow from within even on the grayest of days. This knowledge was not written in any book. It was a dance of fire and timing, passed from a master to his apprentice through years of silent observation and practiced hands. When the great age of cathedral building waned, the demand for this specific, costly red vanished. The guilds that held the secret dwindled, and the precise thermal recipe for that perfect nanoparticle suspension was forgotten. Today, you can stand in Chartres Cathedral and see a red that modern science, with all its precision ovens and spectrometers, still cannot perfectly match. We lost not just a color, but a precise chemical reaction mastered by artists. This same principle of using metals for health, rather than for beauty, was being explored with another lost technology, one that aimed to purify the very water people drank. While the secret to ruby red glass was held in a master's eye, the health of entire cities depended on a different kind of mastery, one that channeled the flow of water itself. We remember the soaring arches of Roman aqueducts, but across medieval Europe, a quieter, equally brilliant hydraulic revolution was taking place. Isolated monastic communities, determined to be self-sufficient, became hotspots for hydraulic innovation. They engineered intricate networks of lead and wooden pipes that snaked across the countryside, bringing fresh spring water directly into their infirmaries, kitchens, and breweries. But this was more than just laying pipe. These engineers faced a fundamental challenge: how to move water across a valley without losing the all-important downward slope that gravity required. Their solution was the inverted siphon. They would run a sealed pipe down one hillside, across the valley floor, and back up the opposite slope. As long as the destination was lower than the source, the weight of the water descending the first hill would create enough pressure to push it up and over the second rise, a clever trick of physics that defied simple intuition. To keep this pressurized system from bursting, they developed early forms of pressure regulation, sometimes using overflow chambers or even primitive water towers to maintain a consistent, manageable flow. The water itself was often cleaned before it even reached the monastery walls. Filtration tanks layered with sand, gravel, and even charcoal were common features, stripping the water of sediment and impurities in a remarkable display of early public health awareness. The knowledge required to build these systems was immense. It began with the surveyor who had to map the land with astonishing accuracy, calculating the gentle, consistent gradient needed for miles of conduit. Then came the pipe makers and plumbers, whose skill in creating watertight, durable joints in lead or hollowed-out logs was a craft in itself. This was not haphazard digging, it was sophisticated civil engineering. So why is a Cistercian abbey's water system less famous than a Roman aqueduct? The answer is one of scale and survival. Many of these medieval systems were local, built to serve a specific community. When that monastery was dissolved or that town's population shifted, the intricate network of pipes and filters was abandoned. It fell into disrepair, buried and forgotten, while the monumental stone aqueducts remained as majestic ruins. The specific, hard-won principles of medieval hydrology, the rules of thumb for siphon design and pressure management, were never compiled into a single engineering manual. They were lost with the communities that depended on them, representing a massive setback in urban sanitation. The clear, managed flow of water was a marvel, but it required another kind of resource management to be truly useful after the sun went down, the control of light itself. The clear, managed flow of water was a marvel, but it required another kind of resource management to be truly useful after the sun went down, the control of light itself. Yet to capture that light for 1,000 years, you needed more than a flame, you needed a perfect page. The pages of the Book of Kells feel less like animal skin and more like solidified light, a surface so impossibly smooth, white, and thin it seems to defy its own origin. This was not mere parchment, it was the pinnacle of a lost chemical and mechanical art. Creating the highest quality vellum was an alchemy of flesh into a divine canvas. It began with the most precious of materials, the skin of an unborn or newborn calf. This skin was not simply dried, it was transformed. The first step was a long, careful soak in a bath of lime. This was not a random soaking, the timing was critical, as the lime worked to loosen the hair and fat without damaging the delicate collagen fibers beneath. After this chemical preparation, the true physical work began. The wet skin was stretched taut on a wooden frame, a Herculeum where it would remain for days, tightening as it dried. Then, with a crescent-shaped knife called a lunularium, the parchment maker would begin the painstaking work of scraping. He scraped away every last trace of hair and flesh from one side, and then meticulously shaved down the inner surface to an astonishing, uniform thinness. This was a dance of supreme pressure and control. A single slip of the wrist could tear weeks of work into a useless scrap. The final stage was a gentle polishing with pumice stone, buffing the surface to a flawless, velvety finish that would eagerly accept the rich inks and vibrant pigments without bleeding or fading. The guilds that held this knowledge were libraries of tactile skill. A master could judge the quality of a skin by its feel and smell, and he knew the exact moment to remove it from the lime bath by a subtle change in its texture. This was a craft passed from hand to hand, from eye to eye, without a single written manual. With the arrival of paper from the East, a cheaper, faster, and more accessible material, the economic imperative for this exquisite craft evaporated. The demand for the finest calfskin vellum collapsed, and the guilds that perfected its creation slowly disbanded. The most refined techniques, the secrets for achieving that legendary whiteness and unparalleled durability, faded into silence. We are left with the books themselves as their own mournful testament. We can still see the perfection of the page, but we can no longer recreate it. The loss of this craft makes the loss of the texts that were never written upon it, the stories and knowledge that vanished with the libraries that burned, feel even more profound. This drive to preserve knowledge against the threat of fire and time would inspire another kind of invention, one that sought to protect not just words, but the structural heart of a building itself. The silent perfection of a vellum page was meant to hold knowledge for the ages, but that knowledge was useless if you could not find it. In the hushed scriptoriums of great medieval monasteries, another kind of genius was at work, one that organized the world's ideas into a coherent whole. These libraries were the true successors to Alexandria, vast repositories where the cataloging system itself was a sophisticated technology of the mind. It was not as simple as arranging scrolls alphabetically. A librarian might use a complex system of colored dots or geometric shapes painted on the spines of books, a secret code known only to the initiated. A blue circle could denote theology, a red triangle might signify medicine, and a green square could mark works of natural philosophy. The very placement of a book on a specific shelf in a specific bay of the library carried deep meaning, creating a three-dimensional map of human understanding where the proximity of a text on astronomy to one on music theory reflected the medieval belief in the harmony of the spheres. The librarian was the keeper of this map. He was often a scholar in his own right, a man who understood the intricate web connecting St. Augustine's theology to Aristotle's logic. He did not just fetch books, he guided other monks through this intellectual landscape, understanding that the organization of knowledge shapes how we think. When King Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries in England, or when secular universities began to collect books on a different scale, these deeply contextual, localized systems were dismantled overnight. The logic behind the colored dots faded from memory, the spatial relationships between subjects were broken, and the unique intellectual framework that organized an entire universe of thought simply collapsed. We did not just lose books to the fire, we lost the original operating system for accessing them. This profound loss of an organizational mind leads us directly to the very tools used to fill those blank vellum pages in the first place. The ink that flowed from a scribe's quill was as much a chemical masterpiece as the page it graced. This was iron gall ink, the standard writing fluid of the Middle Ages, and its creation was a delicate alchemy. The process began not in a laboratory but in an oak grove with the search for gall nuts. These were not true nuts but hard, apple-like growths formed on oak trees when a specific wasp lays its eggs. Inside these galls was a high concentration of tannic acid, the essential ingredient. A master ink maker would first crush these galls and then steep them in water, allowing the mixture to ferment for days or even weeks. This fermentation was crucial as it broke down the complex tannins into a form that would react powerfully with the next component. That component was iron sulfate, a green crystalline salt often known as copperas. When the fermented tannin solution was mixed with the iron sulfate, a dramatic chemical reaction began. The two substances combined to form a new compound, iron galatanate, which was the actual pigment. But here was the magic. The ink that dripped from the quill was not a deep black. It appeared as a faint grayish purple, almost disappointingly pale. The true transformation happened on the page itself. As the written words were exposed to the air, the iron in the ink slowly oxidized, bonding chemically with the parchment surface and deepening over hours into that iconic, rich, and absolutely permanent black. This permanence was its genius, but it was also its danger. Getting the recipe wrong had catastrophic consequences. If the ink was mixed with too much iron sulfate, it became overly acidic and corrosive. Instead of bonding with the parchment, it would slowly eat through it, leaving behind a ghost of writing surrounded by a lattice of holes where the page had literally been burned away by its own words. Conversely, if the ink was too weak, it would remain a faint, washed-out gray, easily lost to time. The master scribe knew the secrets of balance. He understood the precise proportions, the ideal aging time for the tannin solution, and the vital role of the binder, usually gum arabic, which gave the ink the right viscosity to flow smoothly from a quill without bleeding across the vellum. This knowledge was a guarded craft, passed down through generations of monastic or guild workshops. With the arrival of industrial ink production in the 18th and 19th centuries, this nuanced artisanal process was abandoned for cheaper, more consistent, but often less permanent formulas. The deepest secrets of the master ink makers, the little tricks for achieving the perfect, enduring black, were simply forgotten. The very substance designed to make words last for eternity could not even preserve the secret of its own creation. This quest for a perfect, lasting mark stands in stark contrast to our next marvel, a technology of pure, fleeting spectacle that was designed to vanish without a trace. The same chemical genius that created permanent black ink could also paint the night sky with fleeting, brilliant fire. Long before fireworks became a standard spectacle, medieval alchemists and master gunners were experimenting with recipes that went far beyond simple explosions. They discovered that by mixing specific metallic salts into their basic gunpowder, they could produce breathtaking colors. A pinch of copper compound would yield a vibrant blue flame, strontium created a deep crimson, and barium salts produced a ghostly, beautiful green. This was not random experimentation, it was applied chemistry. The creation of a single firework was a multi-stage craft. First, the pyrotechnic master had to carefully grind and mix his chemicals, a dangerous process where a single spark could be catastrophic. Then he engineered a casing, often from layered paper or hollowed wood, designed to contain the initial blast and direct the force upward. The fuse was its own critical technology, a carefully calibrated cord that burned at a predictable rate to give the launch crew time to retreat. For rudimentary rockets, they even crafted launch tubes to control the initial trajectory, understanding that a stable ascent was key to a dazzling bloom in the heavens. This knowledge was the exclusive domain of fireworks guilds, a secret oral tradition passed from father to son. The master knew not just the recipes, but the precise grinding techniques to ensure an even burn and the exact packing density to create a shower of sparks instead of a single dull thud. He was a chemist, an engineer, and a theatrical director all in one. But this art form lived on a razor's edge. As cities grew denser and safety concerns mounted, the most volatile and spectacular recipes, the ones that pushed the boundaries of chemistry and control, were deemed too dangerous. Regulations slowly stifled experimentation, and the guilds, protectors of these oral secrets, began to fade away. The deepest tricks for achieving a perfect emerald green or a sustained golden shower were gradually forgotten, lost in the very smoke they once produced. This brilliant, human-made lightning was a wonder of controlled combustion, a stark contrast to the next lost technology, which attempted to capture the unpredictable fury of the sky itself. The brilliant artifice of colored fire was a human attempt to command the sky, but the sky fought back with a far more primal and terrifying power. Centuries before Benjamin Franklin's famous kite experiment, the builders of Europe's great cathedrals were engaged in a silent, desperate battle with lightning. They could not explain the electrical nature of the storm, but they were brilliant observers of cause and effect. They watched as the tallest structures in their world, their own church spires, were repeatedly struck, set ablaze, and shattered by heavenly fire. Through tragic experience, a form of practical wisdom began to emerge. In some regions, you can find evidence of a remarkable intuition. A master mason might install a continuous strip of metal, perhaps as part of an ornate weather vane or a decorative crest, that ran unbroken from the very tip of the spire all the way down the side of the tower, deliberately embedded into the earth below. This was not a scientifically tested lightning rod, but it functioned on the same core principle. It was a path of least resistance, a carefully crafted metal road designed to tempt the lightning away from the flammable wooden beams and stonework, guiding its destructive energy safely into the ground. This was knowledge written in stone and metal, born from watching which churches burned and which, mysteriously, remained standing after a storm. The understanding was purely pragmatic and heartbreakingly local. The mason who devised such a system in Normandy had no way to share his discovery with his counterpart in Bavaria. There were no scientific journals, no conferences for medieval engineers. His clever solution remained a village secret, a quirky architectural feature that was never standardized or improved upon. For every spire that was protected by this nascent intuition, a dozen others were still vulnerable. The fundamental science of electrical potential and grounding remained a complete mystery, leaving these builders to fight a ghost with tools they did not understand. This fragile, localized knowledge of how to channel the sky's fury was eventually lost, superseded by a proper scientific understanding centuries later. Their struggle to protect their creations from the heavens finds a parallel in a technology that worked in reverse, one that sought to draw a very different kind of power up from the earth itself. The soil beneath a medieval farmer's feet was not just dirt, it was a living library. Across Europe, communities developed a profound, localized science of earth, learning through generations of trial and error how to coax abundance from stubborn ground. This was not the slash-and-burn agriculture we often imagine, but something far more sophisticated, a lost art of soil amendment that echoes one of the great archaeological mysteries of the Americas, the terra preta of the Amazon. These dark, fertile soils were not a natural occurrence, but were intentionally created by pre-Columbian societies through a complex process of adding charcoal, bone, and manure, transforming the poor rainforest earth into a self-regenerating garden that remains fertile to this day. While medieval Europeans did not create an identical recipe, they pursued a similar goal with their own brilliant, localized formulas. A farmer on the sandy soils of England might practice marling, carefully digging up underlying clay and spreading it over his fields to dramatically improve water and nutrient retention. Another, working heavy, wet land, would use a specialized plow with a curved moldboard, designed not just to cut the soil, but to lift it, aerate it, and turn it over completely in a single pass. The most guarded secrets, however, were the compost recipes. These were not simple piles of rotting vegetables. They were precise alchemical mixtures, combining specific herbal plants known to add nutrients with particular animal manures, ashes from certain types of wood, and even ground up bones or fish waste, all layered and turned at exact intervals to create a supercharged fertilizer. The knowledge of which local materials to combine and in what perfect ratios was a deeply localized science. The recipe that worked on a chalky hillside in France would be useless in the peat bogs of the Netherlands. This wisdom was held in the minds of the farmers themselves, passed from parent to child through oral tradition and hands-on practice. It was a sustainable, closed-loop system that built fertility over centuries. So what happened to this deep, generational knowledge? The great enclosure movements and the agricultural revolutions of the 17th and 18th centuries swept it away. New, simpler, and more widespread methods were promoted, focusing on mass production and efficiency. The nuanced, place-specific practices that had sustained communities for 1,000 years were dismissed as old-fashioned superstition. The living library of the soil was forgotten, its pages crumbling back into the earth. This intimate, generational connection to the land itself finds a powerful contrast in the next lost marvel, a technology designed not to nurture a single plot of earth, but to connect an entire empire across it. The same local genius that enriched the soil also shaped the very paths that crossed it. While Roman roads are celebrated for their arrow-straight, stone-paved permanence, medieval road builders faced a different world. Their challenge was not to conquer the landscape with geometric precision, but to collaborate with it, creating durable thoroughfares across the soft, wet, and unpredictable ground that Roman engineers often avoided. In marshy regions, a master surveyor would not simply lay down gravel. He would begin by creating a foundation of brushwood, laying down a dense mattress of intertwined branches directly on the unstable peat or clay. This brushwood layer acted like a natural geotextile, distributing the weight of traffic and preventing the road from simply sinking into the mire. On top of this, his workers would add layers of progressively smaller stone, gravel, and sand, each compacted by the passage of carts and feet. The final surface was not flat but cleverly cambered, arched like the back of a turtle so that rainwater would run off quickly into side ditches instead of pooling in the center and turning the road into a muddy rut. This was not a one-size-fits-all solution. A builder working in a region with abundant flint would use that hard, angular stone for the top layer, knowing it compacted into a near impenetrable surface. Another, with access to chalk, might use it as a binding agent, the knowledge of which local material worked best, how thick each layer needed to be, and the precise angle of the camber was a science of experience, held in the mind of the local surveyor or the master mason commissioned by a town. This was engineering by feel and by sight, a craft passed down through apprentices who learned to judge the quality of a roadbed by the sound a hammer made when it struck the stone. Why would such effective, practical knowledge simply vanish? The answer lies in the shift from local need to national system. With the rise of turnpike trusts in the 17th and 18th centuries, road building became a centralized for-profit enterprise. New, standardized methods were promoted, and the intricate, location-specific tricks of the medieval road right were dismissed as primitive. The deep, intuitive understanding of how to build a road that worked with a specific patch of earth, that used local materials in brilliant, sustainable ways, was paved over and forgotten. The very paths that connected village to village, that carried the goods and ideas of an age, were built with a wisdom we can no longer fully recover. This intimate knowledge of the land, from its soil to its pathways, finds its ultimate expression in the very homes people built upon it. A truly comfortable medieval home was built not from stone, but from earth and ingenuity. Wattle and Daub is often remembered as a simple, almost primitive building method, but in the hands of a true master, it was a sophisticated technology that created walls with the insulating properties of a modern cavity wall. The secret was not in the concept, but in the deeply localized recipe for the daub itself. A master builder did not simply mix mud and straw. He began with an intimate knowledge of his local geography, knowing which specific clay pit yielded a clay with the perfect balance of plasticity and sand content. He would then combine this clay with precise proportions of sharp sand to prevent cracking, and add organic temper like chopped straw or animal hair, which acted as a natural rebar, creating millions of tiny fibers that gave the daub incredible tensile strength and flexibility. The most guarded secret, however, was the inclusion of specific animal manures. This was not just a matter of using what was available. Cow dung, for instance, contained microbial enzymes that, over time, would help bind the mixture into a harder, more water-resistant matrix, while horse manure, rich in undigested straw, added superior fibrous reinforcement. This mixture was not used immediately. It was left to temper, sometimes for an entire season, allowing the materials to meld and ferment, a process that dramatically improved its workability and final durability. The wattle work itself was its own art form. The wooden framework was not a random weave. A master wright knew that split oak, with its straight grain and natural resistance to rot, was ideal for the main upright staves, while more flexible hazel or willow was perfect for the horizontal weaving. The weave pattern was chosen for the wall's purpose: a tight herringbone for a load-bearing interior wall, a looser weave for a non-structural partition. The final daub was pressed into this woven lattice from both sides, keying into the wood so perfectly that the two materials became a single, monolithic structure. This was a craft passed from parent to child, a symphony of local materials and human skill. When brick and stone became the fashionable materials of a wealthier, more centralized society, the economic incentive to maintain this deep, place-specific knowledge vanished. The most refined recipes, the secrets of which manure worked best with which local clay, the exact tempering times for a specific region's climate, were simply no longer taught. We lost not a primitive technique, but a highly advanced form of bioclimatic architecture, perfectly adapted to its environment. The comfort and security of such a home, however, stood in stark contrast to the desperate need for a final, personal line of defense. A knight's trust in his mail shirt was absolute, a faith forged from thousands of tiny, interlocked decisions made by a master armorer. The iconic image of chainmail is one of interconnected rings, but the truth is that most surviving museum pieces are butted mail, where the rings are simply bent into a circle and pressed closed. This was the common soldier's armor. The true masterpiece worn by knights and nobles was riveted mail. Its creation was a symphony of meticulous, repetitive labor. The process began not with wire but with a solid sheet of iron. The armorer would hand-punch each individual ring from this sheet, creating a small, solid hoop. He would then flatten the ends of this hoop, drill a tiny hole through them, overlap the ends, and insert a minuscule iron pin. Holding this delicate assembly on a specialized miniature anvil, he would then pin the pin over with precise hammer taps, creating a permanent, solid rivet. The result was a ring that could not be pulled apart without tearing the metal itself. An entire shirt required tens of thousands of these rings, each one punched, flattened, drilled, and riveted by hand. The skill was not just in the action, but in the consistency. A master could produce hundreds of these perfect, uniform rings in a single day, his hands moving with a rhythm born of a lifetime of practice. This was not merely a craft, it was a high-speed, high-precision manufacturing process centuries ahead of its time. Beyond the riveting itself, different regions developed secret weaves and link patterns, armorers' guilds guarding their unique methods. Some combined rows of solid, riveted rings with alternating rows of solid, welded rings for added stiffness. Others experimented with different ring diameters and patterns to create a shirt that was more flexible at the joints while offering superior resistance to piercing on the torso. The knowledge of which pattern offered the best defense against a specific type of arrowhead or thrust was priceless battlefield intelligence, but the arrival of plate armor changed everything. Why wear a shirt that took a single armorer a year to produce when a breastplate could be hammered out in a fraction of the time, offering superior protection against the crossbow bolts and lances that were beginning to dominate the battlefield? The demand for top-tier riveted mail plummeted. The guilds that held these secrets saw their apprentices move on to the more fashionable and profitable work of plate armor. The most efficient riveting techniques, the specialized anvil shapes, and the secret regional weaves were no longer taught. The knowledge did not vanish in a single day, but faded over a generation, like a language with no more children to speak it. The personal, hand-forged defense of the knight was being superseded, a shift that placed ever greater importance on the colossal, stone defenses that protected entire armies. A knight's armor might stop a sword, but a poorly placed latrine could defeat an entire garrison. Within the cold stone walls of a medieval castle, the Guardrobe was a masterpiece of practical engineering, a system far more advanced than the simple holes in the ground we often imagine. The best of these were not afterthoughts but integral to the castle's design, positioned with a careful understanding of hygiene and hydrology. A master builder would construct a vertical shaft that plunged straight down from the private chamber, often built into the thick outer wall. Its outlet was strategically placed to empty directly into a flowing moat, where the constant movement of water would carry the waste away, or into a deep, stone-lined cesspit located in a rarely used courtyard. This was only the beginning of the design. To combat the inevitable odors, clever builders incorporated ventilation. They understood the stack effect, the same principle that makes smoke rise up a chimney. By building a narrow, secondary shaft that ran parallel to the main waste chute and vented out near the castle's roof, they created a constant upward draft. This silent, invisible system passively pulled foul air up and out, keeping the lord's private quarters remarkably fresh. Rainwater, a constant challenge for any fortress, was also co-opted into this system. Gutters and downspouts from the roof were sometimes channeled to periodically flush the Guardrobe chutes, a natural cleaning mechanism that required no human effort. This entire setup required deep, localized knowledge. The master mason had to know the castle's exact orientation to the prevailing winds to position the vent shafts correctly. He needed a surveyor's understanding of the local water table and groundwater flow to ensure the cesspit or moat outlet would not contaminate the castle's own well, a mistake that could lead to dysentery and surrender faster than any siege engine. This was sanitation treated as a serious architectural discipline, a matter of life and death for a community under siege. So why did this smart, integrated approach to waste vanish? The decline of the castle as a primary residence was its downfall. As fortified living gave way to sprawling manor houses and early urban palaces, this specific, military-grade knowledge of how to engineer a self-cleaning, odor-free latrine system was not translated into domestic architecture. The intricate understanding of ventilation shafts and hydraulic flushing was simply left behind in the abandoned stone keeps. The result was a genuine step backward in public health, a period where the sanitation in a grand new city house was often inferior to that of a centuries-old fortress. The constant battle to manage what left the castle walls was matched only by the relentless challenge of bringing what was needed safely inside. The silent, subterranean war waged beneath the feet of besieged soldiers was a battle of sound. As enemy miners dug their dark tunnels, hoping to collapse a fortress wall from below, defenders turned the very ground into a listening device. Their technology was deceptively simple. They would place bronze bowls filled with water on the stone floors of cellars and along the base of the walls. The slightest tremor from a distant pickaxe would ripple the water's surface, a silent alarm broadcast in concentric circles. Or a soldier with exceptional hearing would lie prone, his ear pressed against the cold ground or against the taut skin of a drum placed directly on the floor, turning his own body into a living seismograph. The most experienced of these listeners could perform acoustic miracles. From the faint, muffled echoes traveling through the earth, they could triangulate the direction of the dig, estimate its depth, and even distinguish between the sound of a pickaxe biting into stone and the scrape of a shovel clearing loose dirt. This was not guesswork, it was a refined sensory skill born from years of life or death concentration. Once the enemy tunnel was pinpointed, the defenders would not wait. They began digging their own countermine, a desperate race to intercept the attackers in the claustrophobic dark. When the two tunnels connected, the result was not a grand battle, but a brutal, close-quarters melee in a space no wider than a man's shoulders, fought in near-total darkness with picks, knives, and hammers. This entire discipline of acoustic detection and countermining was a knowledge written in the vibrations of the earth and the memory of its practitioners. It was an oral tradition passed from veteran to recruit, a fragile art of listening that vanished when cannons made high walls obsolete. This grim reliance on human senses in the dark stands in stark contrast to a technology that sought to master a completely different invisible realm, the science of scent itself. A master perfumer's workshop was a world of scent built on a science of heat and patience. While we think of medieval fragrance as simple flower waters, the reality was a sophisticated chemical craft. These artisans were pioneers of distillation, using intricate glass alembics to coax the very soul from a rose petal. The process was a delicate dance of temperature control. The perfumer would gently heat a mixture of rose petals and water in a sealed vessel called a cucurbit. As the steam rose, it carried the volatile aromatic compounds with it, traveling through a coiled tube, the ambix, where it cooled and condensed back into a liquid. The result was two separate treasures, the fragrant rosewater itself, and floating on its surface tiny, precious droplets of essential oil, the concentrated spirit of the flower. For flowers too delicate to survive this heat, like jasmine, they employed a different, even more painstaking method called enfleurage. They would press fresh petals into a layer of purified fat spread on a glass plate. Over days, the fat would absorb the flower's fragrance. The spent petals were then replaced with new ones again and again, until the fat was utterly saturated with scent, becoming what was known as a pomade. This pomade could then be washed with alcohol to separate the fragrance, creating an absolute, or used directly as a solid perfume. The knowledge required was immense. A master knew the exact temperature to distill sandalwood without scorching its woody notes, and he held secret recipes for solvent blends that could capture scents other perfumers could not. This was a global trade, with routes carrying out from Arabia and spices from India to be transformed in the workshops of Cordoba and Venice. The market for these luxuries was the wealthy elite, the courts and merchant princes. Then came the Black Death. In the face of such overwhelming mortality, the economy for non-essential luxuries evaporated. The patrons died, the trade routes faltered, and the workshops were shuttered. The most refined techniques, the secret temperatures and solvent recipes, died with the masters who held them, a fragrant art silenced by tragedy for nearly a century. This drive to create an atmosphere of beauty and pleasure stands in total opposition to a technology born from pure necessity, one designed to fill the air not with perfume, but with a very different, life-preserving kind of smoke. The fragrant smoke of a perfumer's alembic was a world away from the foul, choking clouds unleashed on a medieval battlefield. While knights clashed in the open, a darker, more pragmatic form of warfare was being waged in the shadows, one that targeted the very air a soldier breathed. Historical accounts, though often sparse and debated, suggest that armies experimented with early chemical obscurants, creating smoke screens that were more than just visual cover. This was not merely about burning damp straw to create a generic haze. The true, lost art was in the recipe. A master of siegecraft would know that burning sulfur produced a thick, acrid smoke that could choke and disorient defenders on a castle wall, forcing them to abandon their posts. He might have knowledge passed down from alchemical texts or grim experience that certain toxic plants or arsenic compounds, when added to a fire, could create a blinding, irritating fog capable of incapacitating an entire unit. The tactical advantage was immense. Imagine a small force using such a screen to conceal their advance across a moat. or to mask the positioning of a battering ram at a gate. The knowledge of which local materials produced the thickest, most persistent, or most noxious smoke was a closely guarded secret, a form of environmental weaponry. Yet this dark art was a double-edged sword. Shifting winds could easily blow the poisonous cloud back onto the attacking army, and handling the raw, toxic materials was a deadly risk for the soldiers tasked with igniting them. As notions of chivalry solidified and later codes of war began to emerge, these indiscriminate, cruel methods were increasingly suppressed. They fell out of favor, deemed dishonorable and uncontrollable. The specific, dangerous recipes for creating these battlefield fogs were not written down in military manuals for fear of condemnation, and so the knowledge simply faded away, a lost chapter in the grim history of siegecraft. This deliberate creation of obscurity, however, finds its absolute opposite in a technology designed to pierce the deepest darkness, to create a beacon of pure, unwavering light. A beeswax candle offered more than just light. It was a pocket of quiet purity in a world of shadows, while common tallow candles sputtered with a greasy, smoky flame that left a lingering smell. The flame of a pure beeswax candle was something else entirely. It burned with a brilliant, nearly smokeless light and released a subtle, honeyed fragrance into the air. This quality of light was not an accident, it was the product of a meticulous craft. The journey from hive to holder began with raw honeycomb. The waxmaker's first and most crucial task was purification. He would melt the crude wax repeatedly, often straining it through layers of coarse linen or even fine straw to capture every bit of hive debris, pollen, and other impurities. Each filtering produced a clearer, paler wax, with the finest grade achieving a luminous, creamy white color. This was a process of patience where rushing meant a flawed final product. The wax was then ready to be formed. Some candles were molded, poured into metal or wooden tubes, but the finest were drawn. A wick, meticulously braided from linen or cotton threads to a specific thickness, was repeatedly dipped into a vat of molten wax. After each dip, it was lifted out to cool and harden slightly before being plunged in again. A master candle maker knew the exact temperature of the wax and the precise timing between dips. Too hot and the wax would slide off, too cool and the layers would not bond smoothly. The goal was to build up the candle slowly and evenly, creating a perfect cylinder that would burn from the top down without dripping or tunneling. Some guilds held even more exclusive secrets, like the use of bayberry wax, a substance painstakingly rendered from the berries of a North American shrub, which produced a candle with a uniquely clean, pleasant aroma. They also knew the alchemy of scent, infusing their waxes with oils of lavender, rose, or rosemary to create candles that perfumed a room as they illuminated it. The industrialization of the 19th century, with its cheap and abundant paraffin wax, shattered this entire world of sensory craft. The demand for artisanal beeswax collapsed, and with it, the guilds disbanded. The nuanced knowledge of wick braiding, the secret filtering techniques, and the perfect infusion temperatures were all rendered economically useless. The warm, steady glow of that perfected flame was a sensory experience, a crafted atmosphere of light and scent that we can no longer fully replicate. That same devotion to crafting a perfect sensory experience, to shaping not light but sound, defined another extraordinary medieval art. The warm glow of a perfected candle flame finds its echo in another crafted marvel, the sound of a truly great musical instrument. We know the names of medieval instruments, the lute, the shawm, the harp, but the specific designs for their most advanced and sonorous versions have vanished into silence. A master instrument builder was not merely a carpenter. He was an acoustic scientist who understood that the choice of wood was everything. He knew that a spruce soundboard cut from a tree that grew on a specific mountainside with its tight, resonant grain would produce a brighter, more carrying tone. He knew the exact formula for a bronze alloy for organ pipes that would yield a sound both powerful and sweet, free from the harsh metallic ring of a lesser mix. This knowledge was a physical blueprint held in his hands and his ears. The construction of a great church organ was the pinnacle of this art. It was a massive, living machine of air and sound. The builder engineered complex wind chests that had to deliver a perfectly steady, unwavering pressure of air to hundreds of pipes simultaneously. If the pressure faltered, the pitch of the entire instrument would waver and sag. Each individual pipe, from the massive 32-foot pedals that shook the floor to the tiny, whistling trebles, was scaled according to secret, non-mathematical ratios that the master had inherited from his own teacher. The action, the intricate system of wooden trackers and rollers that connected the keys to the pipes, had to be built with absolutely minimal friction and play. A delay of even 1/100th of a second between pressing a key and hearing the note would make fast music impossible. These builders were solving problems of fluid dynamics and mechanical precision with wood, leather, and molten metal. Their greatest enemy was not ignorance but progress itself. As musical tastes evolved toward the Renaissance and Baroque periods, these older instruments were seen as outdated. A magnificent Gothic organ was not preserved as a treasure, it was modernized. Its unique pipes were melted down for their lead or recast into new designs. Its delicate action was ripped out and replaced. The specific knowledge of why that particular wood and that specific pipe scale created that unique, lost sound was dismantled along with the instrument. We can look at paintings of court musicians, but we cannot truly hear what they heard. The full, rich soundscape of a medieval cathedral, a sonic architecture as deliberate as its stone pillars and stained glass, is a ghost to us now. We can only guess at the resonance that once filled those vast spaces, a physical vibration that was considered a direct echo of the divine. This loss of a crafted sonic world returns our focus to the physical, to a different kind of material mastery that shaped the medieval world from the ground up. The same alchemical fire that forged the legendary Ulfberht Swords also flickered in the workshops of a few European masters attempting an even greater miracle. They were trying to recreate the fabled Damascus steel, a metal whose surface shimmered with the look of flowing water or a trail of wood grain. While we associate these blades with the Middle East, the raw material, an ultra-high carbon steel known as woots, did find its way to Europe through trade routes. A handful of smiths, likely in places like Spain or Italy, managed to acquire these exotic ingots and attempted to unlock their secrets. The challenge was not just in forging the steel, but in mastering a thermal dance far more delicate than anything required for a common sword. The process began with the woots ingot itself, a puck of steel forged in a crucible in India or Sri Lanka from a specific type of iron ore rich in trace elements like vanadium. This was the first secret, the unique ore that gave the steel its potential. The European smith would then heat the ingot to a precise, glowing orange heat, a temperature where the steel was neither fully solid nor fully liquid. He then had to cool it, but not quickly. The ingot had to cool for hours, sometimes for an entire day, in a controlled environment, perhaps buried in the warm ashes of the forge itself. This agonizingly slow cooling was the true key. It allowed the carbon within the steel to slowly precipitate out, not as random flakes, but in the form of incredibly hard carbide nanowires, chains of iron and carbon atoms that woven themselves through the softer steel matrix. When the smith finally forged the blade, he was not simply shaping it. He was carefully manipulating this internal crystalline tapestry. His hammer strikes and subsequent cycles of heating and etching would align these nanowires, revealing the beautiful, watery pattern on the surface of the finished sword. This pattern was not mere decoration. It was the visible proof of a perfect internal structure that made the blade both incredibly hard and astonishingly flexible, a combination that seemed to defy the very nature of metal. So why did this knowledge vanish in Europe? The Wootz ingots were rare, expensive, and their supply was easily disrupted by political shifts. The process was too slow, too finicky for mass production. European metallurgy moved toward more consistent, bulk methods like the blast furnace, which produced good steel, but it was a homogeneous material that lacked the magical internal architecture of Wootz. The few masters who had partially decoded the thermal cycle never wrote their secrets down. Their hard-won knowledge died with them, and the ability to reliably create that liquid pattern on steel was lost for centuries. The shimmering mystery of patterned metal, however, was not the only place where medieval artisans learned to trap light and movement within a solid object. The shimmering mystery of patterned metal was matched by the challenge of capturing light itself within a perfect sheet of glass. High in the great cathedrals, the largest and most brilliant panes, especially the characteristic bull's eye centerpiece known as crown glass, were created through a breathtaking feat of human skill. A master glassblower would begin by gathering a large, molten blob of glass on the end of his blowpipe. He did not blow this into a bottle or a vase. Instead, he would blow a large, hollow sphere and then, in a move of pure daring, attach a solid iron rod called a pontil to the opposite side of the sphere. Then he would remove the blowpipe, leaving a glowing, orange mass of liquid stone fixed to the end of the pontil rod. Now came the moment of truth. The glassmaker would spin the rod. He would spin it faster and faster, his entire body straining as centrifugal force took over. The soft, pliable glass would respond to this violent rotation, first sagging, then opening, and finally flattening into a large, thin disc that could be nearly 6 feet across. The entire process was a race against the cooling of the glass, a mere minute or two where the material was at the perfect viscosity to be stretched by physics into a flat plane. The skill required was superhuman. The glassmaker had to spin with absolute consistency, a perfect, unwavering rhythm. Any wobble, any variation in speed, and the disc would become a wavy, uneven mess, useless for a window. He had to judge the thickness with his eye alone, knowing exactly when to stop spinning to achieve a sheet that was strong enough to hold its own weight, yet thin enough to let the maximum amount of light pour through. Once cooled, this giant disc was a treasure. Its center, where the pontil rod had been attached, formed a thick, lumpy knot, the iconic bull's eye. This central piece was often used in less important windows or in the homes of the wealthy, a badge of honor for the glassmaker. The rest of the disc was then carefully cut into smaller, rectangular or diamond-shaped panes using a hot iron or a diamond-tipped cutter. The specific recipe for the glass batch was another part of the lost art. The master knew the exact mix of sand, potash, and lime that would create a glass with just the right flow, a specific surface tension that allowed it to spread evenly under centrifugal force without tearing or developing ripples. His tools, the custom-shaped cutting irons and the massive, balanced pontil rods, were extensions of his own body. Then, in the 19th century, the cylinder method of glass production emerged. This mechanical process involved blowing a long cylinder of glass, slicing it open while still hot, and flattening it out in an oven. It was faster, cheaper, and could produce much larger, more uniform sheets. There was no longer any economic reason for the perilous, athletic art of spinning crown glass. The guild secrets of the perfect spin, the precise batch recipes for that magical viscosity, and the nuanced handling of the giant discs were abandoned. We lost the specific human technique required to create that particular handmade brilliance, a light filtered through a disc spun by human force. The creation of these vast windows designed to illuminate sacred spaces leads us directly to the final, fundamental question: how were these monumental structures, these vessels of light and knowledge, protected from the ultimate threat of fire? The final, satisfying click of a true medieval lock was the sound of a mind at work. Behind the heavy iron of a castle door or the polished oak of a merchant's chest lay a mechanical brain, a labyrinth of metal designed to outwit any intruder. The most advanced locks of the age were far more than simple bolts. They were intricate puzzles forged in iron, featuring a series of internal obstructions called wards. These were carefully shaped metal plates fixed inside the lock case, creating a twisted, blocked path that only a key with the exact corresponding notches could snake through. But a master locksmith's genius did not stop there. He would often add false keyways, deceptive channels that led to a dead end, wasting a thief's time and tools. Some even incorporated early versions of tumbler mechanisms, small levers that the key had to lift to a precise height before the bolt could even begin to move. Creating such a device was an art of subtraction. The locksmith began with a solid block of iron, forging the outer case and the internal bolt. Then, with an array of fine files, he would spend hours, sometimes days, carefully carving the unique pattern of wards inside the lock cavity. Every cut was deliberate, every shape a secret. He then forged the key, a companion piece to this metal maze. He would file the bit of the key, the flat part that extends from the shaft, with a series of notches and curves that mirrored the lock's internal landscape in reverse. This was not a process that could be rushed. The fit had to be perfect. The key was not just a tool, it was the only map to a tiny, man-made fortress. The knowledge of how to design these bespoke security systems was the locksmith's most guarded treasure, a high-level trade secret passed from master to a single, trusted apprentice. The guild protected these methods fiercely, for a family's wealth or a king's documents might depend on the uniqueness of their craft. So how could such a vital and sophisticated skill simply vanish? The answer arrived with the chimneys of the industrial era. The New World demanded standardization and mass production. Factories began producing thousands of identical, simpler locks, good enough for most purposes and affordable for the average person. There was no longer a market for a lock that took a master artisan a week to create. The economic foundation of the bespoke puzzle lock crumbled. The guilds dissolved, the apprentices learned to work on machines, and the deep, intuitive knowledge of how to hand-file a unique, unpickable labyrinth of wards was finally forgotten. That final, secure click echoes through history, a quiet testament to 30 marvels that slip through our fingers. From Greek fire to self-healing concrete, from Viking sunstones to hand-forged puzzle locks, their stories are not just a catalogue of forgotten things. They are a profound lesson in the fragility of knowledge itself. Every one of these technologies was born from human genius, yet each was vulnerable, dependent on a fragile chain of teachers and students, on stable trade routes, or on a specific way of life. Their disappearance asks us a difficult question about our own world. What brilliant solutions, what unique ways of seeing and building are we in danger of losing today? Not to a single cataclysm, but to the slow, quiet erosion of specialized knowledge, to the relentless march of standardization, or simply to the assumption that someone else is keeping the flame alive. The story of these 30 lost technologies is ultimately a story about us, a reminder that progress is not always a straight line, and that the light of discovery must be tended carefully, or it too can be swallowed by the shadows. Each of these 30 marvels did not vanish in a single dramatic collapse, but through a slow, quiet unraveling of the threads that held their knowledge together. The loss was never about one failure, but a perfect storm of vulnerabilities that still threatens innovation today. The first and most profound weakness was secrecy. In a world before patents and public libraries, a master's power lay in the techniques he alone possessed. The recipe for Greek fire, the thermal dance for Damascus steel, the precise grind for a master's ink, these were not written down. They were whispered to a single apprentice after years of loyalty. This oral tradition was a fortress with a single, fragile gate. If the master died unexpectedly, if war scattered the guild, or if the apprentice chose a different path, the fortress fell and its treasures were lost forever. This culture of secrecy existed alongside a terrifying fragility in the face of chaos. The Black Death did not just kill people, it exterminated entire lineages of knowledge. When a city lost a third of its population, it also lost the only 3 people who knew how to calibrate a tidal mill's sluice gates or how to achieve the perfect nanoparticle suspension for ruby-red glass. Wars and political upheavals shattered the trade routes that supplied Wootz steel to European smiths and scattered the monastic communities that were hubs of hydraulic engineering. The library was not just burned, the librarians were gone. Economic shifts acted like a slow, rising tide that drowned entire crafts. Why would a new apprentice spend a decade learning the perilous art of spinning crown glass when a factory could produce flat sheets more cheaply? Why would a family continue the generations-old practice of creating a hyper-localized compost recipe when standardized, bagged fertilizer arrived from a distant city? The specialized, beautiful, and deeply effective was often replaced by the merely adequate and economically scalable. This leads to the final, subtle killer, the quiet replacement of a technology without preserving its underlying principles. The magnetic compass was a marvel that made the Viking Sunstone obsolete, but in adopting the new tool, we discarded the profound, experiential art of reading the sky itself. We gained consistency but lost a deep, intuitive connection to the natural world. The greatest lesson from these 30 losses is that technological progress is not a ladder we climb, always upward. It is more like a garden. Some plants flourish, others are forgotten. An entire species can go extinct not because they were flawed, but because the conditions that sustained them changed. In our own era of digital clouds and instant access, we might feel immune to such loss, but this history asks us an urgent question. What are the modern equivalents of the master's secret and the fragile guild? Are we, in our reliance on proprietary software and closed systems, building new vaults of knowledge that could be sealed forever? The story of these lost technologies is not just about the past. It is a mirror held up to our own uncertain future. Our journey through 30 forgotten marvels has permanently reshaped the landscape of the Middle Ages. This was not a dark void between empires, but a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of brilliant ingenuity. We have seen master artisans who forged steel that modern science struggles to replicate and builders who mixed concrete that could heal its own wounds. We have followed Viking navigators reading hidden patterns in the sky and watched monks dare to leap from towers with wings of wood and faith. Each story, from the terrifying spectacle of Greek fire to the quiet precision of the Sunstone, reveals a common truth. History is not merely a record of what was saved in libraries and museums. It is also a vast graveyard of forgotten brilliance, a silent testament to solutions that were once found and then lost. These disappearances were rarely caused by a single catastrophe. Instead, they were the result of a slow unraveling, knowledge hoarded by a secretive guild could vanish with a single plague. A trade route severed by war could cut off the supply of a miraculous material. An economic shift could render a perfect, localized craft economically obsolete. The loss of the Ulfberht sword was a failure of a supply chain. The fading of ruby-red glass was a loss of artistic alchemy. The forgotten art of the Tidal mill was a surrender to mere convenience. This pattern teaches us a profound lesson about the fragility of knowledge itself. Progress is not a straight, inevitable line upward. It is a fragile garden where brilliant ideas can flourish one season and be forgotten the next, not because they were flawed, but because the world that nurtured them changed. As we look toward our own future with its digital clouds and global networks, we must ask ourselves a vital question. Are we building a world where valuable knowledge is truly safe, or are we creating new vaults sealed by proprietary code and forgotten passwords that could one day become the lost technologies of tomorrow? Let the quiet stories of these 30 marvels inspire us to be better custodians of our own ingenuity, to value not just the new and efficient, but the diverse, the localized, and the brilliantly unconventional. What other secrets might still lie hidden in plain sight, waiting for a curious mind to rediscover them? We would love to hear which of these lost technologies you find most fascinating. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you have enjoyed unraveling these mysteries with us, please subscribe to continue exploring the hidden corners of history.